When truth walks into a room, lies start limping. For years they called you the problem, the difficult one, the strange one, the misunderstood anomaly that always has something going on. They built entire gossip committees around your name, turning your existence into a weekly debate topic. But now, something has shifted. The energy around your name feels different. The same people who once argued endlessly about you have suddenly grown tired, not because you changed, but because reality finally caught up with their narratives. It's funny, isn't it? How people can spend years trying to convince the world you're the storm, only to realize they've been the thunder making all the noise. The universe has a way of setting the record straight, not through loud announcements, but through slow, undeniable exposure. One by one, the masks fell. The fake concern, the whispered half-truths, the exaggerated victim stories, all began to contradict themselves. The same mouths that once swore you were the problem are now arguing among each other, trying to remember which version of the lie they agreed to. And here's a fact that most don't like to face. The human brain gets exhausted trying to sustain a false reality. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance, but spiritually it's called judgment. The body can only hold so much deceit before it begins to self-destruct. That's why you're seeing it now: confusion, division, emotional burnout, all circling the same group that once swore they had you figured out. There's something almost comical about it. The same people who once gathered to dissect your every move are now dodging the topic of you like it's radioactive. They roll their eyes at your name, not because they don't care anymore, but because deep down they know they lost the argument against truth itself. And that's the kind of defeat that doesn't just sting, it haunts. So now the tables have turned. You didn't shout, you didn't fight, and you didn't explain. Yet the argument about you died anyway. Because it was never a debate between right and wrong. It was a war between truth and ego. And truth, no matter how quietly it moves, always outlasts the noise. Now let's break down exactly why people are sick and tired of arguing about you, and how they finally realized you were never the problem. Number one, they finally realized you never fought back because you were the mirror, not the battlefield. For a long time, people thought your calmness meant you had no strength. They mistook your refusal to argue for surrender, never realizing you were giving them a front-row seat to their own reflection. Every word they threw at you bounced off your energy and came back to expose them. You didn't have to prove anything because their reactions were doing the talking for you. You were never part of their chaos. You were simply the surface that revealed what they looked like inside. When people live in denial, a calm presence feels like a threat. Your peace forced them to see themselves without the distractions of drama. They thought they were humiliating you, but what they were really doing was unraveling their own character in front of everyone. That's why they kept trying to provoke you. They needed your reaction to justify their story. But when you gave them nothing, they had no script to perform. Their accusations lost power because truth doesn't wrestle with noise. It just stands there, unbothered, until the noise burns itself out. It takes a strong person to choose silence when surrounded by people who thrive on conflict. Most can't stand still under pressure without trying to explain, defend, or retaliate. But you did. And that quiet unnerved them. They mistook it for weakness, but it was self-mastery. You understood something they didn't. If you fight mud, you'll get dirty too. So instead, you let the mud dry up by itself, and now everyone can see who was really rolling in it. The funny part is, after all the talking, arguing, and blaming, people are now exhausted, not because you drained them, but because their own hypocrisy did. Fighting with a mirror is a losing game. They kept trying to make you the villain, only to realize every attempt made them look worse. Eventually, the energy flipped. You became untouchable, not because you defended yourself, but because you didn't participate. Your stillness forced everyone to face the truth they'd been avoiding. And when truth finally showed up, their fight lost meaning. You weren't the problem. You were just the reflection that made the problem impossible to ignore. Number 2. They're not tired of you. They're tired of the guilt you awaken in them. That's the part they'll never admit. Every time your name comes up, it stirs something they've tried hard to bury. You remind them of everything they said they were, but never became. Your presence brings out the conscience they keep trying to silence. It's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's that you expose everything they've done wrong just by being yourself. That kind of truth is uncomfortable to look at for too long. When someone carries guilt, even kindness can feel like confrontation. That's why your peace bothered them. You didn't argue, you didn't retaliate, you didn't gossip back. You just continued being genuine. And that sincerity became a mirror they couldn't escape. Deep down, they knew how they treated you wasn't right. They knew the stories they told didn't match who you really were. So every time they heard your name, their chest tightened a little. They rolled their eyes or changed the subject, not because they didn't care, but because caring meant facing what they'd done. The exhaustion you see now is the weight of unconfessed guilt. It takes an incredible amount of energy to keep defending a lie, to keep pretending they were right about you when everything around them keeps proving otherwise. That's why they argue with each other now, because guilt doesn't stay silent forever. It eats away at peace until truth becomes the only way out. You never had to lift a finger. Their own conscience became your defender. And here's the real twist. Part of them still admires you. That's what makes the guilt even heavier. They tried to discredit you, but deep down they respect what you carry. They know you didn't deserve the hate. They know you responded to cruelty with grace they couldn't understand. That's why they're drained, not from you, but from pretending not to see the difference. You became a walking conviction. You didn't need revenge because truth already did the work. You showed them what integrity looks like without trying to prove it. And now they can't stand the reminder that they failed their own moral test. They're not tired of hearing about you because you're annoying. They're tired because your existence keeps calling them back to accountability they've been running from. Number 3. Their hatred collapsed under the weight of its own lies. For so long, they built entire narratives around you. Stories designed to twist how others saw you and even how you saw yourself. They poured energy into painting you as the problem, convinced that if enough people believed their version, it would somehow become the truth. But lies are fragile things. They demand constant maintenance. And when the foundation is false, the whole structure eventually starts to crack. That's exactly what happened. Their own story about you fell apart, and now they're left choking on the dust of their own creation. The thing about hatred is that it's hard to keep up when it's built on fiction. It takes emotional effort to keep retelling a lie, to keep remembering every detail, to keep faking conviction when, deep down, the soul knows it's wrong. So the cracks started small. Someone noticed an inconsistency. Another person remembered what you actually did or said. Slowly, people started connecting the dots. The truth didn't need an audience. It just needed time. And with time, every exaggeration, every false accusation, every manipulative twist began to turn against the ones who created them. You didn't need to fight back because the truth was already on autopilot, dismantling their stories piece by piece. Lies can survive in noise, but they can't stand stillness. The moment you stopped reacting, their narrative began to starve. They needed your defense to stay relevant. When you gave them nothing, the spotlight turned on them instead. The world started noticing that their obsession said more about them than about you. Their hatred became obvious, their bitterness transparent, their motives exposed. Eventually, people got tired of hearing the same old recycled lies with no evidence to back them up. Now they're exhausted, not from you, but from the effort it took to keep lying. It's tiring to keep pretending, to keep blaming, to keep rewriting a story that never made sense in the first place. They thought they could bury truth under repetition, but truth has a habit of resurrecting itself. And when it did, everything they built against you came crashing down. Their hatred didn't end because they found peace. It ended because it couldn't carry its own weight anymore. Lies always collapse under the pressure of what's real, and you were simply too real to be erased. Number 4, you stopped feeding the chaos, so it starved itself to death. For the longest time, their power came from your attention. Every time you explained yourself, defended your name, or tried to make peace, they got exactly what they wanted: energy. They didn't need to win the argument. They just needed you to stay inside it. Chaos thrives on engagement, and you were its favorite source of fuel. But something changed when you finally detached. You stopped explaining, stopped responding, stopped showing up to battles that were beneath you. And just like that, the storm lost its center. When people build their identity around provoking you, your absence becomes their downfall. You took back what they depended on: your energy. That was the real power all along. They mistook your kindness for permission, your involvement for weakness. But once you understood that not every noise deserves a reaction, everything around you started to shift. The moment you stopped entertaining the circus, the clowns lost their stage. What they called your silence wasn't silence at all. It was divine starvation. You let the nonsense die from lack of attention. Now they're restless because the energy exchange is gone. They can't feed off your emotions anymore, so they've turned on each other, arguing about what to do next. Without your reaction to validate their importance, they've had to face the truth. The drama only ever lived through you. You were the pulse keeping their false narrative alive, and when you unplugged, the illusion flatlined. The irony is, they thought your withdrawal was a loss. They told people you changed, that you don't care anymore, hoping to guilt you back into engagement. But you didn't fall for it. You learned that peace doesn't beg for understanding. It enforces boundaries. And that kind of peace is terrifying to those who thrive on control. Now they're standing in the ruins of their own chaos, wondering why it all feels empty. You didn't win by proving them wrong. You won by refusing to participate. You became untouchable because you finally understood that the loudest noise in the room can't survive without an audience. When you stopped clapping for their drama, the show ended, and the silence that followed wasn't weakness. It was justice. Number 5. Your consistency shattered their collective delusion. They thought if they pushed you long enough, cornered you deep enough, or provoked you hard enough, you'd eventually break and validate their lies. But you didn't. You stayed calm, you stayed grounded, you stayed you. And that simple, steady presence dismantled everything they tried to build against you. People who rely on manipulation can't stand consistency. It exposes their instability. Every time you showed up unchanged, they lost a piece of the illusion they worked so hard to keep alive. You became the living contradiction to their story. They said you were dramatic, but you remained peaceful. They called you fake, but your truth never wavered. They accused you of being unstable, yet your composure stayed solid, while theirs cracked under their own weight. At first they thought they could outlast you, that eventually you'd lose your cool, reveal your flaws, or say something they could twist. But instead, your calm became their frustration. They weren't fighting you anymore. They were fighting the reality that your character was real and theirs was performative. Consistency is one of the most uncomfortable forms of truth. It doesn't argue, it just endures. It slowly makes liars look foolish because they can't fake steadiness for long. Every day you remained authentic, their story lost power. Their alliances started to crumble too, because even the people who once sided with them began noticing the pattern. They realized that the so-called problem remained poised while the accusers kept changing stories, tones, and targets. Eventually, the group delusion collapsed under its own contradiction. The exhaustion they feel now isn't just guilt. It's the fatigue of maintaining a false image while standing next to someone unshakably real. You were the reminder that truth doesn't need revision. They had to keep rewriting their version of events to stay believable, but you didn't have to change a word. Your consistency became your loudest proof, your unintentional testimony. Now, every time they try to revisit the past, it doesn't hit the same. The drama lost momentum because it ran into something it couldn't outtalk, your stability. They finally realized you were never pretending, you were just being, and that simple, unwavering authenticity destroyed the illusion they once depended on. Number 6. You became the uncomfortable proof that God chooses who He pleases. That truth alone broke more egos than any confrontation ever could. People don't mind seeing blessings. They just mind when those blessings land on someone they decided wasn't qualified. You didn't fit their image of what chosen should look like. You didn't come from where they expected. You didn't speak how they thought a favored person should. They confused God's criteria with their opinions. And when heaven picked you anyway, it exposed the limits of their understanding. Your life became the contradiction they couldn't explain. They tried to humiliate you, yet somehow you kept rising. They spoke curses, yet doors kept opening. They tried to ruin your reputation, yet opportunities found you. It wasn't luck, it was evidence. You became living proof that divine favor doesn't need human approval. That's what made them angry. It wasn't just jealousy, it was confusion disguised as righteousness. They wanted to believe that success only comes to the people they deem worthy, and your life kept interrupting that illusion. They debated about you, trying to rationalize how you kept standing after everything meant to break you. Some said you were manipulating, others said you were lucky, but none of them wanted to admit the truth. Grace was covering you. They couldn't accept that God would anoint someone they rejected. But that's how divine justice works. God doesn't pick based on popularity or reputation. He picks based on purpose. You became that unsettling reminder that His choices are not up for discussion. And when they realized their words couldn't stop what was meant for you, the arguments began to dry up. The same people who once claimed to know your downfall by heart now avoid the topic completely. They're tired because they've been wrestling with the obvious. Your growth makes no earthly sense. Every time they thought you were finished, something greater unfolded. That pattern broke their pride. It forced them to confront a spiritual truth they didn't want to face, that God's favor doesn't bend to human bias. Now your existence itself preaches without words. You became the walking contradiction to their theology, the unexpected vessel of a grace they couldn't control. They learned the hard way that divine choice is not a democracy, it's a decree, and your life was the proof that heaven never needed their permission to bless you. Number 7. They're tired because the devil they fed turned on them. What started as small talk grew into something much darker. Every rumor, every insult, every twisted version of your story was like feeding a wild animal. And they didn't realize that creature would eventually come for them too. Gossip feels powerful in the moment. It gives people a sense of control, a false rush of superiority. But spiritually, it's like opening a door and inviting chaos to sit at your table. The energy they unleashed through their words circled back around, and now they're living inside the storm they created. You didn't have to retaliate or pray against them. Their own negativity did the work. Words carry spirit, and every lie they spoke built an atmosphere that began to eat away at their own peace. They thought they were cursing you, but all they did was contaminate their own environment. The darkness they projected onto you eventually filled their homes, their friendships, even their minds. They can't sleep right. They can't trust each other. They can't stop looking over their shoulders. That's not paranoia. That's spiritual recoil. At first, they laughed about it. The drama was entertainment. The gossip made them feel bonded and powerful. But that false unity dissolved fast. The same energy they fed began turning them against each other, exposing secrets, causing confusion, stirring mistrust. Suddenly, the same mouths that talked about you are now talking about each other. That's what happens when people build connections on negativity. The bond eventually rots. Evil doesn't stay loyal. It just changes targets. Now they sit in the smoke of their own fire, trying to breathe in the same air they poisoned. They blame stress, bad luck, or energy shifts. But the truth is simple. They fed darkness, and darkness doesn't know how to stop eating. You were never their punishment. You were just the mirror. The chaos they tried to send your way couldn't touch you, so it returned to sender and began devouring the source. That's why they're so drained now. The thrill is gone, the gossip circle is broken, and the consequences are finally catching up. They thought you were the danger, but the real danger was the spirit they kept entertaining. In the end, the devil they fed didn't stay loyal. It simply got hungry, and they were next on the menu. Number 8. You became the unarguable evidence that time is God's sharpest weapon. What no explanation could fix, time quietly corrected. While others ran wild with their assumptions, you waited. You didn't chase rumors or beg anyone to see your side. You just kept living, kept moving, kept showing up in truth. And slowly, one day at a time, the story began to shift. The longer things went on, the harder it became to deny what was real. The truth didn't shout. It simply outlived the lie. People underestimated how powerful time can be. Lies burn fast, but they burn out even faster. They sound convincing in the moment, but they can't survive consistency. The longer your life unfolded, the more the pieces stopped matching their version of events. The contradictions began to expose themselves. The same people who once laughed or judged started feeling uneasy because your endurance didn't match the image they were sold. You didn't collapse under pressure. You got stronger. You didn't fall apart. You evolved. Time made a fool of every assumption that tried to define you. And now, those who once accused you can't even maintain their own stories. They're tired, not because they've changed, but because maintaining a lie for years is exhausting. Every time truth quietly proved you right, they had to come up with new ways to spin it. And eventually, even they stopped believing what they were saying. The cover they hid behind has disintegrated. The situations, the relationships, the evidence, all of it has turned around and revealed who was genuine and who wasn't. What you didn't know back then was that God was using time as your greatest defense. You weren't being delayed, you were being documented. Every hardship, every misunderstanding, every false accusation was being recorded for a moment like this, when the truth would need no witnesses, just time. Now you stand clear, not because you explained yourself, but because everything false naturally fell away. Time vindicated you in ways your voice never could. It didn't need drama or spectacle. It just needed endurance. And in that endurance, God showed everyone that truth doesn't panic. It simply waits. What once looked like defeat became evidence, and the same clock that seemed slow turned out to be the most precise weapon heaven ever wielded on your behalf. Number 9. They mistook your stillness for stupidity. Now it's haunting them. Back then, they thought your calmness was proof that you didn't know what was happening. They believed you were too naive to catch on, too trusting to see their schemes, too quiet to fight back. They laughed at your patience and called it weakness. But what they never realized was that you were never confused. You were simply choosing not to react. You saw it all. You just didn't need to expose what time was already preparing to reveal. Stillness is one of the most misunderstood forms of intelligence. It's not passivity, it's strategy. You understood that reacting too soon gives your enemies information they don't deserve. You knew that silence makes people show themselves, and they did, every single one of them. They revealed their motives, their alliances, their jealousy, and their intentions, all while thinking you were blind. But now that everything's unfolded, they're realizing you were never in the dark. You were just giving them enough room to reveal what they truly were. Now they're the ones restless. They can't stop replaying the past in their minds, wondering how you stayed so composed while they were busy plotting. It bothers them that you knew and said nothing. That calm look on your face now keeps echoing in their memories, reminding them that they underestimated you. Your restraint now feels like judgment, because it forces them to see just how loudly they exposed themselves while you said nothing. The truth is, stillness requires strength most people don't possess. Anyone can panic, argue, or react, but it takes wisdom to let things unfold without losing your center. You mastered that. And in doing so, you disarmed their entire strategy. They thought they had control because you weren't responding, but really, you were letting the chaos reveal its own leader. When the dust settled, everyone could finally see who had been stirring it all along. Now, the silence they once mocked feels like a ghost haunting their conscience. They can't joke about it anymore. They can't hide behind the same lies. Every time they see you moving on peacefully, it hits them again. Your stillness wasn't stupidity. It was awareness wrapped in discipline, and that realization hurts more than any confrontation ever could. Number 10. Their spirits are collapsing under conviction, not consequences. They thought judgment would come as a public fall, maybe a scandal, bad luck, or a sudden streak of loss. They expected karma to look dramatic, like something they could see and explain away. But that's not how divine justice always works. Sometimes it's quieter, more personal, more psychological. The real punishment isn't what happens around them, it's what's happening inside them. Their souls have become their courtroom, and their own conscience is the judge that never sleeps. The same mouths that once cursed you now replay their words over and over in the silence of their rooms. Every insult, every betrayal, every cruel thing they said about you echoes in their minds like a tape they can't turn off. They can't even enjoy their wins anymore because guilt sits in every room with them. It's not the kind of guilt that fades. It's the kind that lingers, the kind that makes peace impossible. That's why they're so tired. The exhaustion you see isn't from life's pressures. It's the spiritual fatigue of carrying unconfessed wrongdoing for too long. Conviction is heavier than any physical burden. It eats at sleep, appetite, focus, even joy. They try to laugh like before, but the laughter feels forced. They try to move on, but their spirit drags behind them, weighed down by what they did. You never cursed them, never sought revenge, but life has a way of amplifying the truth until it becomes unbearable. They can't unsee how wrong they were, and pretending doesn't work anymore. It's strange. They thought exposing you would bring them peace, but instead, it exposed them to themselves. Every lie they told now whispers back to them in quiet moments. Every act of cruelty they justified now looks smaller, meaner, more desperate. And deep down they know you didn't deserve any of it. That's why the guilt cuts so deep. You were never their enemy. You were their test, and they failed it without realizing what was at stake. Now, their own conscience is doing what no external punishment could. It's breaking them down from within. Conviction doesn't announce itself like karma does. It just keeps pressing until denial runs out of room. And by the time it's done, the punishment won't be exposure or humiliation. It'll be the haunting truth that they hurt someone who only ever meant them peace. And that realization alone is enough to crush the soul. Number 11. The more they talked about you, the more they exposed their own reflection. What started as gossip eventually turned into self-revelation, because energy doesn't lie. It mirrors. Every time they tried to tear you down, they unknowingly broadcasted their own character flaws. Their insults stopped describing you and started describing them. The bitterness, envy, cruelty, and insecurity they projected in your direction became the only things people could see. And over time, everyone started to notice that the stories never quite matched your energy, only theirs. At first, it seemed like they had the upper hand. They were loud, confident, and persuasive. But repetition has a strange effect. It strips words of their disguise. The more they repeated their tales, the more hollow they sounded. Their anger became suspiciously personal, their obsession too emotional to be logical. People began connecting the dots, realizing that their hatred said more about what they lacked than what you'd done. They wanted to destroy your reputation, but their emotional fingerprints were all over the mess. And now, it's their credibility that's in ruins. There's a certain poetry in how truth handles arrogance. You didn't have to defend yourself. You simply stayed grounded in who you were. And while they kept talking, life kept aligning evidence in your favor. The contrast became too glaring to ignore. Your peace versus their restlessness, your growth versus their regression. Every rumor they spread now circles back and points to them. It's almost divine comedy, the universe turning their gossip into a mirror they can't escape from. That's why they're so exhausted now. It's not your name that wears them out. It's what it reflects back to them. Every conversation that starts about you ends with them confronting themselves. They tried to weaponize your identity, but it backfired because your character was too solid to distort. Now, every attempt to humiliate you only reminds people of their own hypocrisy. They thought they were narrating your downfall, but they ended up writing their own confession. And the most ironic part, they can't stop talking. They're addicted to the sound of their own projections, even as it ruins them. The universe made your silence their mirror. And now they're trapped arguing with their own reflection, mistaking it for you. Number 12. You became too evidently protected to be blamed anymore. There came a point when their usual tactics stopped making sense, even to the ones who used them. Every attempt to destroy you seemed to rebound with eerie precision. Rumors dissolved before they could stick. Alliances against you crumbled overnight, and every trap they set somehow closed in on them instead. After a while, it stopped looking like coincidence and started looking like divine interference. People began whispering, not about your flaws, but about your favor. The pattern became undeniable. Every scheme against you ended in confusion for them and elevation for you. At first, they thought you were just lucky. Then they tried to rationalize it. Maybe you had connections. Maybe you were playing some deeper game. But luck doesn't operate with such consistent accuracy, and manipulation doesn't bring peace. Eventually, they had to confront what they didn't want to admit. You were covered, not by influence, not by coincidence, but by something higher than their reach. That realization alone broke the illusion of control they'd built their confidence on. Because once people recognize that someone is divinely backed, fear replaces arrogance. Your existence became a silent sermon, that protection can't be bought, faked, or forced. It can only be bestowed. And nothing threatens the ego of controlling people more than witnessing a protection they can't penetrate. It exposes their powerlessness. They exhausted themselves trying to figure out how you kept standing after each ambush, how you stayed calm while they unraveled, how things somehow turned in your favor every single time. Eventually, even their followers got tired, because it's hard to keep blaming someone when every accusation collapses under the weight of grace. Now, your name carries a kind of caution with it. People speak it with lowered tones because they've seen what happens when someone tries to mess with you. The spiritual ricochet, the instant karmic backlash, the unexplainable reversals. You became proof that divine protection is not superstition, it's spiritual law. And that realization drained the energy out of their slander. There's nothing left to argue when the evidence of favor is too visible to deny. You didn't win by fighting, you won by being preserved, and that preservation exposed just how powerless your enemies really were. Number 13. The tables turned without you touching them. What once looked like defeat transformed into undeniable poetic justice, and you didn't have to lift a single finger. The same people who once controlled the story began choking on their own script. They tried to make you the villain, but time and truth quietly edited the narrative until their roles reversed. You never argued, never retaliated, never begged to be understood. Yet somehow everything aligned to reveal who was who. It wasn't revenge, it was symmetry. The energy they released circled back perfectly to where it began. You see, divine balance doesn't require force, it only needs patience. Every lie told against you carried its own expiration date. Every manipulative act had a built-in consequence waiting to unfold. The more they twisted things, the tighter the noose around their own credibility became. You didn't need to correct them. Their own contradictions did that for you. People began noticing how their stories kept shifting, how their accusations never quite held up under light. Slowly, the spotlight they used to blind you turned back on them. And now, their truth burns under the same scrutiny they once used against you. That's the beauty of spiritual justice. It doesn't operate through spectacle. It operates through inevitability. While they were busy forcing outcomes, you stayed aligned. While they scrambled to keep up appearances, you stayed authentic. That's what flipped the tables. Not aggression, but alignment. The universe can't sustain lies forever. They eventually collapse under the weight of their own distortion. And when that happens, no one needs to defend you. The evidence starts testifying on its own. Now they're standing in the ruins of their own narratives, exhausted and confused. The control they once had over your name is gone, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Not because people stop talking, but because they've seen enough to know the truth. You didn't fight for power. Power returned to its rightful source. You didn't demand justice. Justice recognized your vibration and found you. That's why this turnaround feels divine. It wasn't orchestrated by you. It was authored by higher order. You became the proof that when your heart stays clean, the tables don't just turn. They rotate in your favor with precision only heaven could engineer. Number 14. You're the chapter they can't close because it was their test, not yours. You already graduated from that season, yet they're still emotionally trapped in it. Dissecting, debating, and rewriting events that no longer belong to you. What they don't realize is that your role in their story was never about their comfort. It was about their correction. You were placed in their path to expose the parts of themselves they refused to confront. Their envy, their cruelty, their entitlement, their hypocrisy. You were their mirror, not their enemy. But when the reflection appeared too raw, they attacked the mirror instead of facing the truth it showed. You healed, you evolved. You stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped revisiting the battlefield they created. But they didn't, because while you learned the lesson and ascended, they failed theirs. And the universe doesn't promote what hasn't yet been refined. That's why they're still stuck in discussions about you. It's not obsession, it's avoidance. Every argument they have about your name is an unconscious attempt to delay accountability. Talking about you distracts them from the fact that the real issue has always been them. The reason they can't move on is spiritual law. Unfinished lessons always loop until learned. They replay what they did to you, not because they miss you, but because conviction won't let them rest. You became their exam in empathy, humility, and integrity. And every time they failed, life recorded it. That's why they're uneasy now. They can't rewrite how the story unfolded, and they can't unsee the version of themselves it revealed. Their guilt is the bookmark they can't remove, because the story won't close until they confront the truth. Meanwhile, your peace is proof that you passed. You no longer carry resentment because you understand purpose. Some connections weren't meant to be reconciled, they were meant to expose. The irony is that your detachment became the ultimate test they keep failing. They keep trying to reopen a chapter that heaven already sealed because they're hoping to rewrite what was meant to correct them. But destiny doesn't repeat for ego's convenience. You moved on not because you forgot, but because the assignment was complete. They're still stuck because it wasn't yours to learn. It was theirs to finally face. Everything they said about you eventually turned into a mirror. And now they're forced to watch themselves through the words they once used against you. The war that was waged around your name was never really about you. It was about exposure, about truth, about divine order correcting itself through silence, consistency, and time. You didn't just survive, you revealed. You revealed who was real and who was merely loud. You revealed how favor disarms manipulation. You revealed that calmness is not confusion but strategy, that restraint is not weakness but mastery. And now, the ones who tried to define you are living in the discomfort of their own definition. Your story became their mirror, your peace became their punishment, and your protection became their proof that heaven still interferes in human affairs. The chaos they once controlled now exposes them. The same gossip that fueled them now drains them. You didn't have to clear your name. The evidence did that for you. You didn't have to fight. Divine symmetry did. You were never losing. You were simply letting time do what truth does best, unfold. Now the atmosphere has shifted. The ones who mocked your stillness are now studying your resilience. The ones who plotted your humiliation can't even stand the sound of your peace. You became the undeniable testimony that when your heart stays pure, protection becomes visible. You are not the problem. You were the revelation that revealed the problem. And that's why they're exhausted. The energy they used to fight you is now convicting them. They're drained not from losing control of you, but from realizing they never had it. So don't explain, don't prove, don't revisit what's already been settled in heaven. Just keep walking. The tables have turned without your touch. The truth is testifying without your effort, and the story is finishing itself without your interference. You are living evidence that divine justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just rearranges everything quietly in your favor. If this message resonated deeply with you, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more powerful, awakening insights like this. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. Someone out there needs to hear this truth today. Your support helps this light reach the ones still in the dark. Stay grounded, stay favored, and remember, the truth never dies. It just waits for its moment to be undeniable. God bless you.